All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to RRS Virtual Textile Recovery, Taking Action to Create Circularity. I am Melissa Radowan, Director of Marketing for RRS and your behind-the-scenes technology host for today's webinar. We have a few housekeeping notes that we would like to share. First, all attendees are muted. However, we do invite you to submit questions for the panelists by using the Q&A panel. Please do not use the chat box, but instead click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to open the panel and type in your questions at any time during today's webinar. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Finally, we are recording today's webinar. The recording will be made available on the RRS YouTube channel later this week. A link will be sent to all who registered for this webinar. We have a few polling questions lined up for you today, and we would love for you to join in and help us understand your thoughts on textile recycling topics. There are two ways to participate: mobile phone or web browser. On your mobile phone, open your texting app and type the message recycle123 and send it to the phone number 37607. Or on your computer, open another browser window, don't close us, open another browser window and type in the URL pollev.com/recycle123. You only have to do that once, and then you're connected for all of the polls during this session. Anytime a slide pops up with a poll, your phone or your web browser window will have the same question appear, and you simply submit your answer. Now I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Bill Hall. Bill is an associate senior consultant with RRS. He has over 41 years of multidisciplinary experience in the automotive sector, including manufacturing, product development, supply chain management, purchasing, sustainability, risk management, communications, and human resources. That's a lot. He brings extensive management skills into tech startups, services, and NGOs with a focus on the nexus of supply chain management, resilience, and sustainability. Bill, thanks for joining us today. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Melissa, and welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to be your moderator. And yeah, Melissa, I guess if you're going to spend 41 years in an industry, to keep it interesting, you almost have to do every one of those functions just to make it interesting. But I really enjoyed my time in automotive. I moved on to my next career a year and a half ago, joined the RRS team. But the one thing I've really come to appreciate, I spent a lot of years in supply chain management. I spent a lot of years in running the sustainability organization. And what we're talking about today, which is a circular economy, regenerative supply chains, is absolutely, it's that nexus that Melissa mentioned. And while I'm still learning a lot about textiles, I'm a big fan of the premise of circular economy. So I'm delighted to be joining with the cohort today. We've structured our agenda here. I'll be introducing each of the speakers as we get to these topics, but we start with sort of a current state, the landscape of what we have, what we're dealing with today, and then two technology providers with some really innovative approaches that are being deployed for the purpose of reusing and putting textiles back into use for second and third iterations. Then we will turn to future state, which is really the goal of our event today, which is looking ahead. How do we make change? How do we make change lasting, creating a truly scaled circular economy for textiles? And that tees up the roundtable, where we're hoping for everybody's insightful questions to really probe the action-oriented agenda that we want to lay out for ourselves. So now, Melissa was nice enough to take you through the polling, so we have our first one, and hopefully this will be easy. Oh, we've already got some answers. Good for you. Good for you. You saw it ahead of time. So, what is your role in managing textile recovery and reuse? We're wondering what kind of participation we have today. Are you a brand, retailer, or manufacturer? Are you a collector? Are you a sorter or grader or broker? Are you into the repair, reuse, and recycling elements of business? Or maybe it's none of those, maybe it's more than one of those, so you've got advocate, interested party. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're looking at as many advocates and interested parties as possible. So let's see how the numbers tally up. Melissa, we usually give it a minute or two to, when things start to stabilize. Okay. So So a lot of folks are saying, hey, I really want to learn more and hopefully join the team. That's great to see. At the end of this hour, hopefully you'll be deciding where you can play a role more prominently. Thanks for joining. So at this point, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Jackie King, who is the Executive Director for the Secondary Materials and Recycled Textiles Association, known as SMART. And she's been at SMART since 2009. By the way, she also joins us with audio only as her internet's down, thanks to a run-in with Hurricane Isaias. I think that's how you say it. She's in Solomon's Island, Maryland. The sun is shining now, but the internet is down. So Jackie, thanks for persevering through the effort. Let me talk about the rest about SMART and what she does. It's an international trade association comprised of for-profit companies engaged in all aspects of textile reuse and recycling, including used clothing, wiping materials, and fiber industry companies. In her role as executive director, Jackie acts as the chief staff liaison to the SMART board of directors and is responsible for the administration and implementation of SMART board policies and initiatives. With that, Jackie, please proceed.
Thanks. Thank you, Bill, and thanks to RRS for inviting me to participate in this panel presentation today. I'm expecting to learn a lot. Hopefully, I can give you a little bit of a perspective from SMART. SMART vision and mission is to be the leading industry voice promoting high standards and best practice for reuse and recycling of textiles and related secondary materials. Our members reduce solid waste by collecting, reclaiming, and closing the loop by processing, reusing, converting, and distributing these recyclables. Next slide, please. Our membership consists of, as Bill mentioned, for-profit textile reuse and recycling companies. They are engaged in reuse and recycling of pre- and post-consumer textiles. That includes basically three types of companies. Those engaged in used clothing collection, grading, sorting, or brokering secondhand clothing and textiles. Those companies engaged in the wiping rag industry, where they look at materials that aren't suitable for secondhand market or things that would be pre-consumer that are mill ends and textile manufacturing places. And then finally, fiber conversions companies that focus on recycling of materials that aren't suitable for secondhand or wiping rag. And mostly that's a mechanical type of recycling. Next slide, please. So our members are from North America. About 80% of our membership is comprised of companies from Canada and the US. We do have an international contingent of membership. A large contingent is from India, Pakistan, and the United Arab Emirates. And then we also have the remainder from Central, South America, and Europe. SMART was started as a nonprofit trade association, as Bill mentioned, in 1932, and was really a US-focused organization. We have transformed over the years to be more of an international organization, and our largest growth in membership has been from the international area, particularly India, Pakistan, and the United Arab Emirates. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a background if you're not familiar with what happens to clothing and textiles when they're no longer used as clothing or textiles. 45% are sold in the secondhand or used clothing markets. About 30% are in the wiping rag area. So those materials are cut up and made to wiping rags used in commercial, industrial, hospital, hotel, all kinds of uses. And then about 20% are ground up into fibers to make other products. And that leaves you a remainder of about 5% that aren't usable. We always say that most clothing and textiles can be reused or recycled as long as they are clean and dry, free of any kind of hazardous chemical or material. The US Environmental Protection Agency's figures show that about 5 to 6% of these materials end up in the waste stream or in landfills. In the United States, only about 15% of these materials are recycled. which means that about 85% could be recycled. There is some impact from fast fashion in the quality of materials that can be reused and recycled, particularly for the highest use, which is sale as secondhand or used. But the sad news in the US anyway is about 80 pounds per person of clothing and textiles are thrown away each year. Next slide. So the current path of textiles in the United States, and really I think a lot of around the world, but basically from my members' perspective in North America, is that most of the collecting is done in North America from my members. The sorting and grading of what particular type of end market it's going to go to, either from a reuse perspective or wiping rag or fiber, some of that is still done in the United States and Canada, but largely a lot of that has now migrated outside of outside of North America due to labor costs. Some secondhand is still sold here in thrift outlets in the US. Wiping rags are certainly sold in North America. Our members that still collect in the US and Canada, predominantly in the US and Texas. There are some other places in Canada, a lot around the Toronto area. But as I mentioned previously, a lot of these materials are sold to companies in India, Pakistan, United Arab Emirates, or Central and South America, where they're then sorted and graded for their specific use, and then exported to buyers around the world. Due to COVID-19, many of countries, just like in North America, where used clothing and textiles are bound or closed, so markets are starting to reopen, but some recent bans due to concerns about disease have caused some disruption in the supply chain, and I'll talk about that in a second. Next slide, please. So our sorters and graders of our membership are starting to export clothing and textiles again to the major markets, Africa, Asia, Central America. Thrift stores have started to reopen, and that includes for-profit stores, which our members are a part of, and then also charitable stores like Salvation Army, Goodwill, St. Vincent de Paul. Many of these stores, we know from our members, have instituted safety measures to help protect employees and their customers. There is plenty of supply because as a lot of people were shut down during the pandemic, people were cleaning out closets and getting materials together. And so now those materials are ending up in either the thrift stores, for-profit, or charitable organizations. So there is a lot of supply. As far as wiping materials go, in North America anyway, there has been a huge demand due to COVID-19 because of the need for these materials for disinfecting and cleaning. Some of our members, I think, will start to, or have, if they haven't already, are having difficulty getting materials from other countries that if they had been importing some wiping rags. Also, a lot of them are engaged in the non-woven markets as well. And so a lot of the non-wovens prior to COVID had been coming from China. And so certainly with COVID, there was a big disruption in the supply chain there. Many of our members also based in the US and some in Canada were bringing in wiping rags from countries outside of North America. And so, disruptions there due to markets being closed or businesses being closed has caused some problems, especially with increased demand. Next slide, please. So a little bit about some other limitations on exports from North America. I'll touch a little bit. I don't want to go on too long, but a little bit about bans past and present. The East African community countries consisting of Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, I'm going to miss one, Burundi, back in 2015, announced that they were going to band together and ban the importation of used clothing. Primarily, the reasoning was that it was to help promote their own individual textile industries. And, you know, at the time it was concerning for our members because that's a huge market for where their used clothing and textiles go, and also because there's a great need for those materials. Those countries ended up moving forward on banning, or prior to an official ban, raising tariffs so high that it was in effect acting like a ban. So we worked as an organization, SMART did, with the US government to try to use some levers that were in place because of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA. It's a unilateral trade preference program in the US which provides duty-free access to those countries and other sub-Saharan countries. So we used the levers afforded us from AGOA to try to influence them not to ban used clothing and textiles. And eventually we ended up filing a petition with the government, making our case for making sure that there was a free flow of goods from the US to those countries. And ultimately, we were successful in convincing Kenya initially, and then Uganda and Tanzania followed suit not to move forward with the ban and to eliminate the duties that they had imposed. The only country that didn't move forward with it was Rwanda, and because of them continuing to ban clothing and textiles, their AGOA benefits were revoked. So since that time, that was in 2017. Things have been going very smoothly with, you know, our members being able to export to those countries. However, recently with COVID-19, Kenya imposed a ban, primarily saying it was due to worries about transmission of disease from textiles that were imported from other countries. We reached out to the US government, also to the Kenyan government, and certainly, you know, we tried to educate them and rebut those claims, because for the most part, there is no disease transmission from clothing, especially the clothing that had been sitting on a ship being transported over there for, you know, weeks at a time. We have worked with other associations besides ours, which is based in the US. We've worked with several textile recycling associations to try to convince Kenyan governments to change their mind on the ban. And so they have actually approved allowing importation of used clothing again. However, they are still in the process of coming up with regulations to regulate that importation. And that is concerning to us because it's been almost a month now and nothing has changed. So anyway, it's a long story about the bans. We are concerned because we feel like some of these issues that we thought had been resolved are recurring, and really using COVID as an excuse for banning secondhand. And we have you know, made the case and certainly convinced many people that, you know, secondhand and new manufacturing of textiles can coincide with one another, which they have in many other countries. And we feel like, you know, this is certainly a concern to us that, you know, perhaps they're going to try to ban it because of reasons beyond disease. There were some issues in Uganda with shipments going through there to be bound for Kenya. We're working again with our government and governments around the world to try to ensure that there is a free flow of goods to these countries. And as far as other markets where there's been limitations, a lot of it has been due to the pandemic, that a lot of the countries have been closed or workers are not working and able to enable them to move forward with bringing in clothing again. And I think the only other thing I would say is that, you know, we feel like what our members provide as far as from a reuse perspective and recycling perspective is a way for all of these materials to have a home until they have really reached the end of their life. And I know that the rest of the panel is going to talk about what happens when we get to an end of life for these materials, and I'm looking forward to hear about their technology and what else is available. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Congratulations to the work you and your team at SMART are doing for advocacy and guidance. Before we move to our next speaker, I do have a quick follow-up. Kind of zeroing in on the sorter and grader sector or portion of the value chain. You highlighted some of the challenges, such as labor costs that requires a lot of exporting, not to mention the COVID-19 headwinds. But looking ahead, your eye to the future, what is your prognosis for this portion of the industry, the sorters and the graders? Is it viable in its current state for the membership in terms of profitability, in terms of sustainability, or do you see that a transformation or restructuring has to occur?
Well, I would say that, that community, sorters and graders, it's a global industry, much like any other manufacturing and production industry. And like those industries, sorry, my computer is giving me a battery low signal, not good. The supply chain costs, labor costs, customer demand will drive who and where these operations flourish. I will say the bright spot is that now more than ever, textile waste is being understood as a global issue, not just in geography, but across the many segments of the apparel and textile industry. And in order to move closer to circularity, you must design for it. So raw material producers, manufacturers, brands, and consumers all play a role in helping to close the loop. And as the new technologies, which I know we're going to learn more about on this call, emerge and a new circular mindset grows, there's becoming more opportunity for all the stakeholders to work together on solutions. Those that are embracing, experimenting, and participating in these innovative reuse and recycling ideas, I think will be the most likely to flourish in the long run. So I think any of these companies that are sorting and grading, they need to, be aware of what the opportunities are for the future, and be prepared, if they need to make a shift in, different technologies they're implementing, or where they need to be if having a large quantity of feedstock needs to be in place in order for these new technologies to work, then I see there will be a shift for those people that are willing to take the opportunity and be on the cutting edge.
Very good, thanks. So some pieces are coming into place in your opinion. That's great. Well, we'll be picking up this conversation about the future in a few minutes. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next up, Cindy Rose, founder of Worn Again Technologies. Cindy joins us from the countryside of outside London in the United Kingdom. Thanks for joining today, Cindy. Let me talk about your early career, which was as a filmmaker in music videos and documentaries. And over time, what evolved was a deep interest of yours in the impacts of commerce and global economics on society and the environment. So in 2005, these interests of yours led to your formation of Worn Again, which has now been where you have been driving forward ever since, from its early beginnings in upcycling to its current transformational polymer recycling technology. Cindy is an award-winning entrepreneur and an early pioneer of the sustainable fashion movement, having co-founded the Fashion Awards, the world's first sustainable fashion awards in London. So Cindy, take it away.
Thank you, Bill. That was a great and long intro there. And thanks to Jackie for the first presentation there, which was a great setup for today's conversation. Super excited about being involved today, and really want to commend RRS on the white paper, which has brought us together today. It's such an important time for circularity in textiles, and the work that's been brought out and the information in that report is so valuable, and we're pleased to see it's now being discussed on a wider scale. So I am going to take us through a couple of slides to talk about Worn Again Technologies, our approach, and I look forward to getting into the roundtable discussions, and thanks to everyone for joining today too. Looking forward to those questions. But first, just to start with a bit of background. So I set up Worn Again back in 2005 with a very simple but ambitious vision, which was to eradicate textile waste. Now, in the early years, we spent many years upcycling, taking existing textiles, turning them into second life products, really experimenting to understand what the challenges of textile recycling are and why only or less than 1% of existing textiles are turned back into new textiles. And so it was not until 2012, until we really had our aha moment, when we were introduced to Dr. Adam Walker, our Chief Scientific Officer now. And we realized that with our vision and his approach and brains and mindset as a physical chemist, focusing on dissolution chemistry, that together we could find a solution that could help deal with this problem of textile waste and turning it back into new resources. So if we go to the first slide, in 2012, we started the development of this process. It's a polymer recycling process for textiles and, well, polyester and cotton textiles, as well as PET bottles. So just taking you through the process starting on the left of the slide. As inputs, we can take in polyester and cotton textiles, cellulose as well. We can also take in PET bottles. It's polyester, it's PET, it's the same material. The inputs are entered at the beginning of the process, and it goes through a process of separation, decontamination of the raw materials, and then recapturing those raw materials to produce two end outputs. So we have, oops, we've gone to the next slide. Going back a slide, there we go. And so our two outputs from this process are a polyester PET resin, or a pellet, which is the building block that goes into fiber and textile production all over again, equivalent in quality to that as virgin polyester made from oil byproducts. And then on the other side, we're able to dissolve the cotton and recapture the cellulose to produce a cellulosic pulp, which is the equivalent to dissolving wood pulp, which is sourced from trees. And so these are our outputs. Very early on, the goal was to produce virgin quality outputs using an environmentally beneficial process with outputs that could compete in price with virgin raw materials. Our goal with this process is to replace the use of virgin raw materials. So we realized early on we needed to be able to compete to be able to do that. Going into the next slide here. So this is an overview of Textiles collection. Jackie covered a lot of that there. I won't go into too much detail, but starting on the left, taking a global shot, only at about 25% collection globally. Of course, this varies per region. Sadly, in the US, it's at a staggeringly low 15% collection rate, whereas in Europe, we have higher rates that vary per country. And then the middle column here is looking at once collected, the separation into rewearables and the non-rewearables. For us, as a polymer recycling technology, this is the fraction, or this is the section we're interested in, is the non-rewearable textiles, which are currently going for downcycling, but also the millions of other tons that are still going to landfill and incineration and aren't being reused. Now, the final column on the right here is a breakdown of those non-rewearables by fiber. And this was carried out as a result of a fiber sorting trial that we did in the Netherlands quite a few years ago as part of a a project called Fiber Sort with Circle Economy. And what we found was that quite a high proportion of what's in our end-of-use textiles is polyester cotton blends. So they're all trapped in blends. There's quite a significant amount of pure cotton. and of course the other. But really we recognize, when we knew that a lot of polyester and cotton was going into textiles, but in terms of what ends up in those final products, being able to deal with blends, we recognize being a huge challenge that we needed to overcome, that today's methods of recycling are unable to deal with. So going on to the next slide, drilling in a bit deeper. So this is our actual feedstock specification. And it's breaking it down a bit more in detail here. So we can take in pure polyester and blended polycotton blends or polycellulose blends. And we can take garments with up to 10% other. So this can be nylon, wool, elastane. It doesn't matter what it is. It gets stripped out of our process. And then we also require textiles to be, free from contamination like oil or paint. And then we also need a pre-processing step that gets rid of all the buttons, zips, and accessories, but especially metal. That's the one material that we can't take into our process. So a bit of additional pre-processing required before going into our process. Now, we don't actually require high volumes of this today, but what we do need to do is start the communications with the collectors and the sorters from a sorting and supply perspective, so that the industry can start preparing and understanding the timeline and the future investments that are going to be needed to be able to supply us high volumes of this feedstock specification in the future. And also for brands, brands needing to understand, how they can design to create more efficiencies, so that when the textiles they're designing today are more efficient and can go into processes like ours and produce a higher yield. So I think subject to fully scaled and industrial processes like ours, the most important aspect for us and for textile to textile recycling processes overall is feedstock. There's millions of tons of it out there, but so much of it is still going to landfill incineration. And we also need this side of the supply chain to adapt and evolve their operations to be able to supply. So going to the next slide here. This is, thank you. This is a snapshot of where we're at in development. So we have a pilot plant that has been launched up in the north of England, a place called Redcar, which we announced earlier this year. And the purpose of the pilot plant is really to conduct trials, to generate data, to generate outputs, and it's all about optimizing the process. This will then inform the next phase, which is the demonstration plant, which will then provide the blueprint for us to license the technology to plant operators around the world. Now, we've been in development, this is year 8, of what on average can take about 10 years to take a new technology from in the lab, beaker size, small scale, to a first industrial plant. So we're well on our way. And yeah, again, from a feedstock perspective, we don't need a lot today, but we need to be planning for the future. Let's see, and also just to mention, so it's a licensing model. We have a very ambitious goal to play a big part in replacing the use of virgin raw materials, virgin resources that go into textiles. And we know that that makes up millions and millions of tons on an annual basis. So you can do the maths, that's a lot of plants, and we want to get there as quickly as possible. Moving on to the next slide here. So here we go. So this is an overview to show where we sit in the wider circular system. We've got the blue box where we've got worn again. We're simply the raw material processors, but we fit into this wider system. And if any part of the system is weak, it can all collapse. So the point of this really is to show that regenerative recycling technologies bring these two supply chains together. The conventional textile production supply chain, and actually very little needs to change on this front. They're going to carry on producing textiles using the same raw materials they're using today. But highlighted here in red is really where we see the innovation and adaptation that's definitely needed around collection, around simplifying sorting into rewear and non-rewear, going through fiber sorting, which can be done at an automated high volume level and with pre-processing steps. And I saw there was a question on the side here about whether this can be done closer to home or to do with labor costs and how sorting happens. And actually, we see the future of sorting and reprocessing of raw materials happening much closer to home. It doesn't make sense to ship all of these textiles around the planet to be sorted if we can start adapting the sorting processes and the automation side of it to then be able to reprocess closer to home. So going into the next slide here. I'm not gonna, these next two slides, I'm not gonna stick on these for too long because I don't want to steal Marissa's thunder. It's a point that she brings out in the report quite well. Just to reiterate here, we see huge opportunities for today's collectors and sorters moving from a model like this. This is very oversimplified, but it's based on high labor, manual labor, sorting multiple grades into many different categories. And especially when it comes to non-rewearables, absolutely this can be done. If we move to the next slide, this can be done in an automated way. Bill, I think you mentioned the NIR project in the Netherlands, that, there are different innovations in development today, but absolutely automated NIR technologies to separate by fiber composition that enables the sorters to separate by fiber and supply the varying technologies, whether they're mechanical or regenerative recycling technologies in the future. Very exciting, huge developments in this space. And I think this is really at the core of what our discussion is about today. And hopefully Harold's overview of RenewCell and what they're doing will bring more flavor to the conversation as well.
Cindy, thanks so much. Very informative, and again, congratulations to what you're doing at Warren Again Technologies. You've done a nice job sort of emphasizing the importance of the full ecosystem to work, but you have definitely tilted your hand saying, but with the feedstock needs to be assured, and collecting and sorting there is an opportunity there. So that helps guide us as we look to the future. One quick follow-up though, as you move to the end of the line of the value chain, your output, your end deliverables, you talked about this, the importance of price competitiveness, right? Which absolutely makes sense. So within the Warren Again Technologies team and the end products that you're planning on delivering to your customers or are now through the pilots, are you price competitive yet? And if not, what will it take to get there? But price competitive to virgin alternatives.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's an important question that many around the world are asking, and I think one of our goals from the very beginning has been to develop a process that delivers not just virgin equivalent outputs, but also to enable our future plant operators to compete on price. And to do this, our job is about, in our development is to develop a low cost process in itself in terms of OpEx and CapEx that will enable this. So that's really been central to our developments. And it also involves being able to pay a fair market price for the inputs that have been collected, separated by fiber specification, and pre-processed to become feedstock into our process. So, you know, that's first and foremost what we're working towards as we commercialize. And we have to, if we want to compete with virgin resources. We know from history that if products have even just a small premium, it's very hard to break the market. But to answer your question from a Warren Again perspective, you know, cost neutrality of circular outputs from our process, we aim for that to happen as soon as we have a first industrial plant up and running. So once we have volume outputs, and that will be in the next few years. So not today, because the volume and the scale isn't there, but when we do, that is absolutely at the core.
First plant will do it. Excellent. Well, all the best to you, and congratulations on some great, exciting technologies. We'll move now to question number 2. And you've heard us talk about, I think Cindy referred to it as the staggeringly low 15% diversion rate in the US. So we need to set a goal for the future. So based on what you've seen so far and what you feel, what should be our ambitious yet realistic goal for textile collection, reuse, and recycling by 2025? So looking ahead 5 years from now. Interesting. There was an early shot of a few people saying, let's go for 75% plus. Given that we've been stagnant at 15%, boy, I have a feeling some would say 25% gets us there. We've sitting in 15, but this is good. So a lot of folks, the majority opinion says, why not shoot for triple? Triple the rate would get us to 45%. Oh, and now it's all leveled out. Let's see, I've got to get rid of my grid. So yeah, they're all okay, even Steve. So something much greater than 15. Thanks. Well, we're going to set our sights on at least the 25, if not much higher. Now I'm pleased to introduce, joining us from Stockholm, Sweden, Harold Cavalli Bjorkman, the Chief Marketing Officer at Renewcell. In this role, Harold leads strategic marketing, branding, and corporate communications for the firm overall, as well as its product brand, Circulose. Harold has a background in marketing, sustainability communications, and consumer insight, working in a variety of industry contexts. Harold was previously a consultant at Weber Shandwick, where he led strategic marketing projects for such global brands as Sonos, IKEA, and Ericsson. Harold, thanks for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you once again. I just want to echo what Cindy's intro. It's very honored to be part of this webinar. This might be a strange picture to start with, but I should explain that a bit. This is actually a picture of a blue dress marketed by H&M. It was introduced on 26th of March this year, and it's the first dress made from our post-consumer recycled materials, Circulose. I'll tell you more about what that is in just a second. We're Renewcell, and we have the humble tagline of making fashion sustainable. You can go to the next slide, please. So, just in brief, you'll find that we're very similar to Warren Again and what they're trying to do, and we really share an affinity for making this circular loop for fashion work. What we do is that we have a process that's been developed since 2012 by a group of scientists. Started out at the Royal Institute of Technology here in Stockholm to look at ways of really salvaging the cellulose that you can find in cotton that's discarded all over the world by the millions of tons each year. Sweden is a country that's really built on capabilities of turning its vast forests into valuable products for making clothes or buildings or paper and all of that. And so this is a company really built on that legacy of excellence within pulp and paper production. We've had quite a few years in development, close to the 8 years that Warren Again. We have that parallel as well. We've developed through a number of stages of prototyping, and then really hit a big milestone when we started construction and finished construction, of course, of our first industrial production site here in Sweden. We're still a fairly small company, about 23, I believe 24 is the latest headcount actually, employees. And we're now on the cusp of really commercializing our process and our product. We can go to the next slide, please. So just briefly describing what it is actually that we've patented and what we bring to the market. It's a process, the recipe for turning used and discarded textiles into a new feedstock for making new textile fibers. At our plant, we receive textile waste either from production or from consumer waste. We start by mechanically shredding up the materials to get them down to size so that they can be processed in the water-based process that we use to adjust the properties of the cellulose in the material. We optimize three primary characteristics of the material. It's the reactivity, it's the viscosity, and it's the brightness. And once we've done that in the proprietary process that we have, we also separate out the small contaminants that we have that comes with all textile products. In our case, it's polyester. We're not a polyester recycler, so we have to separate that out. We have to separate out metals and pigments and things like that. And when that's done, we have a slurry of dissolving pulp consisting of basically pure cellulose suspended in water, and we dewater that cellulose. We put it out on a conveyor belt that's basically a paper machine. We dry it out, and we end up with something, if you look at my screen, that looks like this. It's like a white piece of cardboard, and that's dissolving pulp. Now, this type of product is used to make all viscose and lyocell and other man-made cellulosic fibers that's in use today. But that's made from wood, so we make the exact same product, but using textiles instead. And that way we close the loop on textiles. We can go to the next slide, please. And once again, like Warren again positions itself, we want to make it clear that we're not an alternative for the industry to skip a bunch of steps in the waste hierarchy. Reduce and reuse is always preferable when it comes to diminishing the negative environmental impact of the industry. Where we come in and add something is as an upcycling option to be able to take the materials that have already been used as clothes and as textiles and put that back into use as textiles. We can go to the next slide, please. So just a brief look also at our plant. We're placed with our plant, so we have a head office in Stockholm in the east of Sweden, and then basically in the middle lower third of Sweden, we have our Kristinehamn recycling plant, which has a dimension capacity of 7,000 metric tons per year. We're not there yet. We're ramping up as quickly as we can. We have 12 people working there, and it's an actual industrial production site where we make commercial volumes of the dissolving pulp that we produce. Go to the next slide, please. So to give also the guests today an idea about what kind of products or what kind of waste we actually source and what we buy for feeding the plant in Kristinehamn, we're pretty picky, but still wide enough to have plenty of potential recycling options for waste that's currently not being recycled. Because we're a cellulose pulp producer, we require a lot of cotton in the garments or in the textiles that we get in. So we prefer high cotton content garments. Currently, we're at 98% is our requirement. We prefer to work with materials that are white, indigo, or undyed. We found that these are easiest right now since we're using a pretty we're using an eco-friendly de-dyeing and bleaching process that's used in all pulp manufacturing processes using wood as well. We'd like to have lighter and or indigo colored materials. Of course, just like any others, we want to keep our materials free from any non-compliant, REACH compliant chemicals in the materials. But an important point to consider, apart from the materials themselves, is the actual delivery format of the materials. A big part of what we need to solve in making these types of processes work in the bigger scale is also like package the materials in bales and make sure that you have the wrapping, or you don't have wrappings and things like that around it. That makes it basically hard to handle in the industrial setting. So typical inputs we work with today are post-consumer denim leg panels. We use a lot of industrial waste as well. So we are finding a big volumes already to feed this plant and even further plants in the future. But I thought I also just mention the fact that we're planning to build further capacity and expanding beyond the one site that we have today pretty soon. And if we're kind of picky with the small scale line we have today, we're going to have either an even wider available or wider capability of taking different types of fractions for our next plant, which is probably going to be about 60,000 tons per year. Next slide, please. And also to give you a sense about what kind of partners we're working with today to supply the plant in Kristinehamn. We're working on the one hand with consumer waste, with sorters and graders that supply us with materials that correspond to our specification, and we're actually signing up now to feed also the next plant. And for the production waste side, we go directly from the mills, we get production waste. And then we also have the category of unsold goods, which brands come to us and ask a lot about we can solve, and we have some ways of working with that too. Next slide, please. Just one last thing, something that we're very proud of is just recently, 2 weeks ago, we launched with Levi's, really a proof that this type of material that we're producing with Circularity, which is our product brand name for the product we produce, it's really proves that a high quality brand like Levi's is ready to work with these type of materials. All right. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Harold. Our hour is quickly going by with some great information, so we're going to quickly move to our next speaker. But congratulations and thanks again, Harold. Working well with the brands, the Levi's and the H&M. I think that speaks to the larger ecosystem, and perhaps will be a theme when we talk about next steps. How do the brands play a role? But at this point, I'd love to introduce our final panelist, Marissa Adler, Senior Consultant at Resource Recycling Systems, or RRS. She's the lead author of the recently published white paper, Textile Recovery in the US. Your specialties include recycling systems, product packaging recovery, stewardship policy, recycling and reuse programs, and the circular economy. Marissa has over 13 years of experience in developing and supporting recycling programs for local governments, including your tenure with the New York City Department of Sanitation. Marissa, please proceed.
Hi, thanks, Bill. So we've heard a lot of really great information today about current recovery pathways from Jackie and reliance on export and the challenges about that kind of reliance, and also about next-gen recycling technologies from Cindy and from Harold. So I'm going to go through a couple of these slides quickly, just in the interest of time. So if you could go to the next slide. This is just showing how quickly textile waste has grown in the US waste stream. On a raw tonnage basis, textile waste has increased 78% between 2000 and 2017. And just for comparison purposes, the overall waste stream only grew 10%. On a per capita basis, textiles grew 54%, and the overall waste stream decreased 5% per capita. So bottom line here, textile waste is growing really fast. Next slide. Actually, I'm going to skip over this slide because Jackie talked to it pretty well. I did want to note here, it gets a little complex with the different data points here, but the main point behind this slide is just that there is a really big gap between rPET supply and demand when you're taking into account the demand from the US beverage industry and all the textile and apparel industry of products that are sold into the United States. And so we're going to need probably a little bit more than double what we currently have in rPET supply by 2030 if the beverage industry pursues their recycled content goals and the textile and apparel industry pursues their recycled content goals. And we don't currently have enough bottles to meet all that supply. So that's what this 4.2, the third bar is. But we have plenty of polyester in the waste stream that we could leverage. All right, but we know it's a tough uphill battle to leverage that textile waste and the polyester in those textiles. Next slide. So that really begs the question, well, what is it that we have to do in order to start advancing the circular economy for textiles? In RRS's work, we found generally there are 6 elements that are the basis of a sound recovery value chain. You really need strong and convenient collection systems, widespread. You need processing, so you need to be able to sort the materials that you collect and ready them for the next phase that they're going to be going to, which in this case is reuse and recycling of textiles. Number 3, you need strong end markets, robust end markets that create that demand and that pull of material through the system. So you need brands and manufacturers committing to using recycled content, for example. Number 4, you need compelling outreach and education so that the consumer base has the information they need in order to participate. You need supportive policies, and I'll touch on this in my next slide. And of course, we need collaborative partnerships, public-private partnerships, information sharing, and joint funding. So you can go on to the next slide. One of the major gaps right now is in sorting. I think as Cindy had mentioned, and Harold had mentioned, each of those kinds of technologies has input specifications. You know, no zippers, no metal. You have to have, it has to be fiber sorted. So right now we don't have a way of doing that on a mass basis. So that's where the concept of a textile MRF comes into play. It's just the same as a regular material recovery facility for traditional curbside recyclables, except this one is just dedicated to textiles. And you would have a quality sort first, then a sort by fiber type, and then you could sort by other categories like brand sort if a brand wants their own materials back for resale and repair. So let's move on to the next slide, because I think this next slide really sort of embodies the actions that we can start taking now in order to move ourselves along to a circular economy for textiles. So the first one is fiber composition research. As our other speakers attested to today, we don't really know what blends are in the waste stream right now. We know that, how much of it is polyester and how much of it is cotton, but we don't know the form and format that these take and how they're blended together. And we really need to know that in order to create the business case for, for our textile MRF and for our regenerative recycling. So we need to do waste characterization studies that focus on fiber-based analyses or we need to start, the brands need to start incorporating project digitization into their supply chain so that they can track throughout a product's life cycle the information about fiber content goes along with it. We need supportive policy in order to unlock investment. So things like, extended producer responsibility or voluntary producer responsibility. And there are a lot of other types of supportive policies that we can enable as well. We have to educate the public. This is really still a struggle. Through marketing, defining the terms that the industry uses, through behavior modification research. We really need to overcome the low participation barrier that we're facing right now and the misconceptions that are out there about what can be recycled and what can be donated. And then finally, design for recovery is another action we can start taking now. Brands can start designing for longevity, repairability, disassembly, recyclability, and that just sort of reduces the steps that are needed to get a garment from the point of collection and through the system to a point where it can either be reused or recycled. When you're talking about recycling, it also improves yield, which reduces lost costs. And so with that, I think I will, you can go on to the next slide. Yeah, with that, I'll stop there. And I know that we are over time. So I will turn it back over to Bill if I'm not sure if we have time for one last poll.
Oh, let's do that. Thanks, Marissa. And apologies to all the viewers. A lot of content, but we're going to do a few things. A parallel process, a popular supply chain technique, just that plug. But questions, we've got 32 questions from over 160 participants. We will not be able to answer them online right now, but we will provide the responses to those questions during our, when we provide the recording. So thank you all for chiming in. Sorry we couldn't do the dynamic version of responding. We just ran out of time. So thanks for weighing in on this final poll. You can see it's kind of spread. Looks like a lot of folks are talking about government policy mandates. If it's okay, we're going to take you a couple minutes past, because in lieu of the audience questions, I'll pose to the panelists a very specific one for you. What should be our most urgent and immediate next step? You've seen the obstacles. You've seen the technologies. Marissa talked about feedstock, research, policy, design. So we'll go through the order of the spokespeople, starting with Jackie. What do you believe, if we want to do something tomorrow, what should it be?
Well, I would say, I know I saw a lot of questions in there from folks about curbside recycling. How is this collection done? Are there mandates? I mean, I think that's one of the things to get, policy changes in predominantly U.S. I mean, Canada has done some, but basically there's very limited curbside textile recycling. I think really the education of the public and consumer, but then a place for them to be able to get textiles collected easily. Certainly our members are collecting all the time in a variety of ways, but the more you make it convenient and easy for these materials to be collected, the more that they can be reused and recycled and end up in, ultimately the processes that Worn Again and RenewCell are working on, and hopefully will come to fruition in a an efficient and a profitable model for them, as well as keeping things so that a lot of stuff is not going in the waste stream. So that would be my number one.
Okay, thanks. So it's collection, providing the feedstock, and policy to support it. Cindy,
Right.
What do you think?
Thanks, Bill. I would say, so for circularity to happen, we can, on a product level, that can start today very clearly with reuse, resale, repair, leasing from a product level. If we're looking at circularity in raw materials, that can only happen when technologies that can produce virgin equivalent outputs are industrialized and scaled. And this is going to be happening over the coming years. But what we can start doing today while we're waiting for that is we've talked about it. I mentioned it 100 times, so I hope it sunk in there, is that, we can bring collectors and sorters together with the regenerative recycling technologies, understand our feedstock specifications and what we're going to need in the future in terms of adapting their operations to supply high volume, and that's going to be moving into regional supply. It's going to start making more sense economically to start processing at the point of collection. And then also these same feedstock specifications are important to inform brands in terms of them designing more efficiently for circularity. So I think these two supply chains need to be brought together. But of course, all of this, government policy change, engaging brands, all of it is part of the bigger system change that needs to happen. And there's plenty to be getting on with today for sure.
Okay, thanks very much, Cindy. So streamlining the supply chain, integrating it, driving forward with brands on one side, policy. Excellent. Harold, how about from your vantage point, what's our most pressing next step that we need to focus on?
I think it's really, if it's one thing, commitment. And that's, I mean, that can be on different levels, and the immediate concern is really on the demand driver in this space, at least as we see it, and it's brands. They've put out quantitative targets about X% for recycled by this such and such year. It's time to sign contracts on it as well, because then we can finance it and then we can scale it up.
So put their actions where they're making long-term commitments.
Take some risk.
Right. Very good. Brands are a power force, or a force to be reckoned with, and therefore advocacy. And thanks, Harold. Marissa, from your point of view?
Yeah, I would say the two things that I would love to see happen starting tomorrow, today maybe, is funding some fiber-based waste characterization studies, and or being able to obtain that information directly through, working with brands and manufacturers. And then the other thing I would love to see happen is the development. I would love to develop a working group around supportive policy and defining what that means, and defining what that means so that the brands are dictating that, and local governments are not the ones creating policies without knowing the industry as well as those in the industry. That's what I would say.
Very good. So you're kind of creating that ecosystem, and it's working group, it's the people, the technology, and the processes that support it. Well, all good things. In the interest of time, and thank you to all of you for participating. On behalf of Melissa and Jackie, Cindy, Harold, and Marissa, our thanks, our apologies that the questions have to be deferred to written as a follow-up, but you'll see those shortly. And thank you all for joining the cohort of Circularity for Textiles. We will succeed. We can get to the 45 to 75% as we continue to work forward with experts like the ones that joined us today. Thanks all. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.